Hey friends, back again for another semi-short video. Well, we'll see. We'll see how much I expand on this concept. This is a concept that I use quite a bit clinically. In fact, I would say I do it 100% of the time for couples, which is appropriate because this comes out of a particular couples model, which I'm going to get into here in just a second. Couples therapy model, I should say. It's useful for other things, though, including parent-child dynamics, any kind of relationship dynamic, friend dynamic, a worker, coworker dynamic. And we are going to start very simply with this infinity symbol that I have on the screen. So where this is coming from is Dr. Sue Johnson's emotionally focused therapy. So there are, I think, 4 main therapy models for couples. Usually once somebody decides that they want to work with couples and do couples counseling, they will need some kind of a model to help form what is happening in the treatment plan. So this one begins with an infinity, and what we do is we break down. So the conversation might begin with like, tell me about, an argument that you keep having. What's something that you argue about all the time, or tell me about the last argument. So, therapists don't necessarily need to spend the whole time like breaking down an argument. And I never wanted to be the clinician that would break up an argument. Like, I don't want to hear it, and I don't want to try to mediate it. Like, I'm not really interested in to listen to people fight. But I am interested in analyzing the way that they fight. And the more that I get into this and break it down, I think you'll understand why the fight is useful information. We learn a lot about ourselves in our close attachment relationships, such as a couplehood or a parent-child relationship or a close friendship like your BFF. We're going to relate to one another. And this symbol of the infinity, I will always say, it doesn't actually matter where we start. We still end up in the same loop. Meaning, it doesn't matter who got grumpy or who had what behavior or who was having unmet attachment needs that given day. Who started it is irrelevant. Because with an infinity loop, you're just in it. However you got there is irrelevant. It's not the point. And if you don't agree with that, then, maybe you're not wanting to work on that relationship. Like, it takes some give and take to try to not suggest that it's all your partner's fault or whoever you're in relationship with, that you're trying to break down the conflict. But anyway, beginning with the idea of the infinity, and it matters not at all where you enter in. And as I describe what the other elements are on the next slide, you'll see that it doesn't matter at all where you enter it. So that I say all of that to diffuse the idea from the very beginning that anybody is at fault. So common language we will hear when somebody is coming into a fight is basically they started it. Or if they hadn't done XYZ, then I wouldn't have done XYZ. That's true, but the cycle is the cycle, and y'all created that cycle together. So there's really no origin. So we begin with the infinity. Then we get a little more complicated. Let me see if I can get it to transition to the next one. Okay, so what we have here is that same infinity. Okay, but you see there are directional arrows now kind of going all over the place. Okay, so what we're doing is we've got very commonly in our relationships, we will have a pursuer and a withdrawer. Now, sometimes that goes along the lines of an anxious attachment and an avoidant attachment person. Not necessarily. You may actually have 2 people who are pursuers or 2 people who are withdrawers, but the tension in the stressful parts of our relationship end up sort of forcing somebody into the pursuer or the withdrawer position. And there's no value statement about what's better in terms of pursuer or withdrawer. I am mostly a withdrawer in my interactions, and there's no judgment about that. It's just how I operate, how I've learned to operate, right? Okay, so we can see at the top we've got pursuer, withdrawer, and then that's just labeling it. So, if a couple came in and they start describing it, and you're mapping it out, which I will do in real time. I'll do that over on the in our members only spaces, like on Patreon, and I can map things out for you in real time. We could do it like a case. If y'all want to bring one, we can break it down. That might be fun. I do this live with couples on their first session, and then we refer back to it many, many, many times. So we have pursuer, withdrawer. So you would write the names, whoever's sitting on the couch across from you. And you write their names on the top of the, on the left and the right. And so you're describing their argument. And then eventually it will reveal itself that one is the pursuer, so one is the withdrawer. So you just mark that up at the top. So, and that's all displayed by how they're feeling and the behaviors that we're seeing. So then we see across the middle, the midline, you see this dotted black line that goes right across the middle. I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but I'm drawing right across the middle of the whole image, going horizontally right through the middle of that infinity. And what that line is showing us is sort of what we see versus what we don't see. So what we see, we might think of that as like the iceberg, right? We see the top part of each iceberg, but we're not seeing what's happening underneath the surface. And in this model, in EFT, we're learning how to keep the misconnection redirected down below the surface. Naturally, very naturally, our interaction tends to stay above. So for example, well, let me continue to highlight the elements. So then it's an infinity. So the infinity sign is going like, let's say, it's actually quite hard to explain it in this way. But okay, so if we have, you can see over on like the left-hand side, it shows behaviors and secondary emotions. And then over on the right-hand side at the top, we have behaviors and secondary emotions as well. So what that means is that when we are in disagreement with one another, we're having an argument, both partners, let's say my husband and I are having an argument. He's seeing, right? This isn't what's below the surface. It's what's above the surface. He can see my secondary emotion and whatever behavior is coming from that emotion. And I likewise can see his secondary emotion and whatever behavior is coming from that emotion. So we call them secondary emotion because there is a primary emotion. We are very quick to get away from primary emotion. They're very paralyzing feelings usually that are our primary emotion, and we want to get out of that as quickly as possible. So we get to something with more activation, like anger has a lot of activation, so we don't feel powerless. So just biologically, we're wired to do that. So primary emotion gets like a flash, and then we're off to secondary emotion and the resulting behavior. Likewise, our partner is having something flash and then having, a quick dip into primary emotion, then moves on to secondary emotion, and then we have the resulting behaviors, right? So what's happening and why we mark it out in infinity is because the partner that we're seeing the secondary emotion. So I'll go back to example, my husband and I. He is seeing my secondary emotion, my behavior, and I'm seeing his secondary emotion, his behavior, right? And think of it as that top part of the infinity. So if this is my husband, his secondary emotion, let's say he's feeling resentful. That's his secondary emotion, and his behavior. So my husband is very logical, like he can fight with logic. So if he's resentful, I'm going to get really like logical arguments from him, okay? So that has an effect on me, but it's not directly across to my anger side or my critical or aggressive side, right? It's not going to come to my secondary emotion or my behavior. It's going to go down. Okay, so we've got this resentful, my partner's resentful, and he's using that logical like argument thing. You can see my face like as I think about it, like it's very upsetting to me when it happens. We try not to have this happen, obviously. Okay, but it comes over and it hits down below the surface. So do you see how that works? his secondary emotion and behavior hits down below where my primary emotion is. And again, I'm going to pop right off of that because nobody likes to stay. Let's see if any of these words fit. On this particular map, the example they're giving are hurt, alone, unwanted, unimportant, unloved, sad. Let's see, what would I get into? Usually I feel, I would say probably like alone, like, yeah. And I'm going to pop off of that really quick, and I'm going to get to probably anxiety or anger. And then in my case, because I'm a withdrawer, the behavior you would probably see from me is a shutdown. I generally shut down. So he's got this kind of behavior coming over the top. He's resentful and he's using a logical argument, and it's hitting me down below the surface, and I'm feeling alone. Pop off of that very quickly and move into mostly just avoidance. Like, well, I guess my behavior is the avoidant behavior, but it's definitely like a fear, probably fear. I'm alone and now I'm fearful and I just want to get away from it. So my behavior would reflect that I'm shutting down. I want to avoid, I want to get away. I might go in another room. I might like shut down in a variety of ways, right? So the point is that we don't want to focus on his behavior. The logical approach to the argument, like his super logical, resentful argument isn't even the issue. Like we could be arguing about who turned on the light switch, who loaded the dishwasher, who forgot to put something on the calendar. Like it matters not at all what the content is, except that it has to be handled down below the surface. So I want to be curious not only, okay, well, hold on before I get into that. So then likewise, what does he see, right? He's not going to see alone because I popped right off of that and moved into fear, right? He's going to see that I'm fearful, and then he would see my withdrawal behavior, and he's going to react to my withdrawal. Because, well, in his case, he's the pursuer. He wants me to stay involved, and now I've shut down. So now we go back into the infinity loop. Now that behavior from me is going to hit him down where he's sensitive in his primary emotions. What's he going to feel? Probably rejection or hopelessness. But he's going to pop right off of that and up into resentment, anger all over again. And then use all of his behaviors that he normally uses, right? So this plug and play for every couple. I mean, they all have their individual like behavioral representations, but it kind of follows along this path of primary emotion, secondary emotion, and then the behaviors that we're witnessing. And people will often want a clinical approach to like deal with the behavior. The behavior is not the issue, friends. The primary emotion is where the attachment needs are. That's where if you want to talk about intimacy and closeness, an intimate relationship with somebody or feeling close to somebody, a good friend, your child, that all sits below the surface in those primary emotions, and how well we attend to that is how really a measure of how close we can be. So that's the infinity loop. You can see the arrows are kind of going all over the place, but hopefully that's making sense to you. It's easier when you're talking about your own problem. Like if you were to take this and apply it to your own argument pattern with your partner, you'd be like, oh, I can see it. It's easier to see with your real life example. In the Hold Me Tight program, which is you can get the book and work through it. It's called Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson. And you can work through it in workbook form. You can also go to like people they're called Hold Me Tight weekend workshops. They're like a 3-day workshop you can go to. It's like getting like 12 sessions of couples counseling. If you can figure out this cycle, that's like 90% of your counseling work. One way to phrase it is the more that, the more that. So the more that XYZ happens, the more that XYZ happens, right? So the more that, the more that. So I like that phrasing. So the more that you are feeling resentful and use that logical argument with me, the more I feel alone, and then I get fearful, and then I shut down. And the more that I shut down and am in fear of you, the more that you feel rejected and hopeless. And the more that you feel that, the more that you act out in a way of resenting me more, and on and on and on in an infinity loop. So couples will say, I keep having the same argument over and over and over again. If that is part of your dynamic, EFT is a good model of therapist. Not a model of therapist, a model of therapy. So finding an EFT, emotionally focused therapy, finding that kind of a clinician is a good fit for you. There's, like I said, about 4 models of really well-known models of therapy, and they're for different things. But if this cycle issue is a part of what's going on for you, you might want to look for an EFT clinician. So let me show you this. Somebody published a case study. And since they published it online, I'm going to assume that they had, in this case, Janine and Rob had, and it's cited down here at the bottom, Joelle Lazar, who is clearly an EFT clinician out of centerpointpsychotherapy.com. And she mapped out Janine and Rob's distress cycle. So she put in the middle of this that there was a trigger, which was some level of disappointment about a birthday. That's just placed there. It doesn't necessarily belong there, but it is the content. And you'll notice the content is above the line. So we're talking about that content, but really the issue, and you can see Joelle's got a little heart down there. That's focused on what is the need. What is the emotional attachment need that Janine and Rob are trying to get to? And there's a need for connection. So starting with the behavior that we see, I don't know who is who. I'm not sure who the, let me see, do I see it on here? I'm not sure who the pursuer is in this couplehood, but Janine and Rob somebody had a disappointing birthday. And the secondary emotion that one of them showed was anger, criticism, and contempt. And the behavior that they displayed was using a bitter tone and then saying, I knew you would mess this up. Okay? So if we follow that, that's over on this left side. I knew you would mess this up, with feelings of anger, criticism, and contempt. That arrow you follow over through the infinity, and then it goes down below to the lower right-hand corner. And here we have this clinician, Joelle, is using the language of secret. So it's secret attachment need, secret attachment fear. It may be secret. It may not be a secret. It may be something that they both know well, but it's definitely this primary emotion, this primary need. They're popping off of it quickly and moving into secondary and then the resulting behavior. But, so we have this pursuer behavior. I knew you'd mess this up. Again, it doesn't matter where we enter. That's just where I chose to enter. I could throw a dart, enter anywhere, and we would have the same conversation. Secondary emotions showing by this pursuer of anger, criticism, and contempt. That's all visible to the other partner. And the behavior is visible to the other partner. I knew you'd mess this up. Bitter. Okay? And that hits down below the surface on the other side. And that's hitting in, I need to know that you love and accept me. And the fear, well, hold on. Let me pause on that part about the I need to know that you love and accept me. That's the advanced piece. The initial part is whichever partner this is, I don't even know how I would guess whether it would be Rob or Janine, but whoever is on the receiving end of the pursuer behavior of whoever's on the receiving end of I knew you'd mess this up has a fear of I will never get it right. and feelings of inadequacy. The feelings that they experience, primary emotion, sadness, rejected, shame, hopelessness. That is a cascade of very difficult feelings. And our body doesn't like that. So we're going to pop right off of that and pop back up to the stuff that the other person will be able to see. Secondary emotion, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And the behavior, distraction and retreating to the man cave. So going to another space. That's my behavior for sure. You can see too that on this chart, on Joelle's chart, they are labeling that distancer. That's the same thing as the withdrawer. So that's a very typical withdrawal behavior. We have somebody who's going towards, and that's our pursuer, and somebody who's going away, and that's our withdrawer or our distancer. I need to get some distance from you. So I might get to some distance by, binge watching Netflix or screwing around on my phone. I might move over to my man cave or to my, go for a drive or whatever, some kind of retreat behavior. So that comes equally over the top towards the pursuer, right? So the pursuer is seeing, oh, my withdrawer partner has contempt, defensiveness, and is stonewalling. And the behavior they're demonstrating is distraction, and they've left now. They've left. And where's that going to hit? That's going to hit below. So it comes up over the top and it's down below. And so our pursuers, the scary part that's down below the surface is sadness, fear, loneliness, feeling unloved, and resigned. Like, I'm never going to get what I want here. I'm never going to be understood. I'm just, so lonely and unloved. And then there's an attachment fear, which gets into the attachment language, which I'll talk about in just a second, which is I'm not worthy of being loved. And they are getting that not from the lower stuff on the right-hand side of the page. They're getting that from the part they can see. But it's, I'm not worthy of love. That's like, catch your breath, that's going to take your breath away. So you're going to pop right out of that as quickly as possible and get back to secondary emotion, anger, criticism, more and more. The more that, the more that. The more that you have that behavior, the more that I feel anger, critical, and more of the same behavior of like, oh, I knew that you were going to be like that, right? So the more that, the more that, the more that, the more that, okay? Joelle's done a great job here of identifying attachment needs. So, everything in my land comes back to attachment as well. In that is where, like I said, that's where our real intimacy is. It isn't really, you distract yourself and leave in the middle of the fight and go to your man cave. It's really not about you criticizing me and saying something like, I knew you would mess this up. It's not about that. It is, I worry that I'm not worthy of love. And the other partner, I feel like I'm never going to get it right and that I'm inadequate in this couplehood, which is devastating biologically. Like, we hate that. And then what Joelle has labeled the secret attachment need, which I would imagine the goal that Joelle had with Janine and Rob was to make it a not so secret attachment need. What do you need? Our pursuer, in this case, needs to know that they're important to their partner. Funny enough, the behavior that their partner is displaying is actually because they are important. The secret sad feeling underneath there that I will never get it right is about how important you are. Does that make sense? So that's where we can, if we connect there, it just puts out the heat so quickly. I need to know that I'm important to you. All of the behavior on our distancer side and all of the emotion on our distancer side is directly related to how important that pursuer person is to them. Likewise, everything that our distancer needs, our withdrawer needs, I need to know that you love and accept me. Why do you think I'm so hurt? I don't feel important to you. I feel unloved. and you're saying you need to know that you love and accept me, that's all I want from you. We want the same goal. You see how that's connective. And we can get in there and go, babe, I do love and accept you. You are important to me. Like, you can meet those needs, diffuses the whole fight. It's very empowering when people can map out this cycle for themselves. Like I said, in any kind of relationship. So I encourage you to spend some time with that. If this is something that you deal with in your relationships and you would like to learn how to break down, do the Hold Me Tight workshops, find somebody who's offering that in your community. It's group work, but only for like the lecture portions and like the video samples of like Sue Johnson working with the couples. But the majority of the work that you actually do is just one-on-one in a room, like you and your partner in a room talking about things. And then, at least in my experience of it, the clinician comes in and does a little bit of work, kind of make sure you're on the right track and then leave you to work it. But for the most part, your more intimate disclosures, your private disclosures are private. They're in a separate space in the big group room, or in like in cases where I've done it, you have your own office and you're just working in there. So you go to the big group, you watch the video, you learn about a certain concept, and then you come back and do private work. So if you're not down for doing that with a clinician, get the book. Learn, the Emotionally Focused Therapy book. There's like a one for clinicians. I don't really advise that for somebody who's unless they want the sort of clinical version of it. But the Hold Me Tight is the book that is the foundation for these Hold Me Tight workshops, and it walks you through how to break down the cycle that you're in. So it's really a good self-help book for a couple. Lots of good conversations come out of that. Lots of growing of intimacy, and it's not shame-based. You don't spend a lot of time going like, well, if you would only do this, then I wouldn't do this. It's more the opposite, like empathy driven, like I can see why you would have that behavior or those feelings because, you're coming from these primary emotions, and I want to support that. Like when we love one another, or even just like in a friendship, we care deeply about what's going on underneath the surface of our partner, our friend. We want to help take care of that. If there's a way that I can help you get you out of that, I would want to. Okay, so I have one more to show you, and this is a bonus for my therapist friends, because I want you to appreciate just how much your emotional labor, how important it is. Let me advance the slide here. Okay. So I wanted to show you this for my therapist friends. This is what's going on for you. So this is the therapist over here on the left, in her therapist outfit. Okay. And the therapist has relationship to, this is a therapist who's doing work with a couple, let's say. So so in this case, she has a relationship with partner number 1. She has a relationship with partner number 2. And she also has a relationship to the relationship. So in couples counseling, sometimes you're doing couples counseling and it's more like two individuals who are just co-working issues together. But with EFT and I'm not as familiar with the other models, but I believe that Gottman and the Couples Institute all kind of focus on the client isn't really like Janine and Rob from the last slide. It's the couplehood of Janine and Rob. So the therapist has the emotional labor of the relationship to partner number 1, the relationship to the relationship, and relationship to partner number 2. So that's intense. The other thing for my therapist friends, just noticing the other work that the therapist is doing to regulate themselves. There's their own family attachment history that is affecting things that are kind of getting, of course, being triggered, and the clinician has all that work to manage that, and then whatever current life stressors are going on for them and the nature of their current attachment relationships, like if they're arguing with their partner in a similar way, all kinds of, triggers and intensities, but also relevant experience that they're drawing on. And that whole intrapsychic dynamic, like and then their cultural background, which may or may not match the cultural background of the clients that they're working with. So there's a lot of work going on. And then it's multi-level on these infinity loops. I just want you to have a good appreciation, clinicians, for what work you're doing. So each person is bringing all of these elements into the relating. And then the focus is on that negative cycle. That's what we call this cycle on the infinity loop. You might refer to that as the negative cycle. It's actually a positive cycle when you get it fixed. It operates in a way to kind of fuel itself and infuse closeness and intimacy. So then it becomes a positive cycle. But again, people aren't usually in therapy during the positive cycle part. They're in the therapy for the negative cycle. So that becomes the focus of the clinical work. And then we also have this idea of like co-creating, like it's being co-created by them. It's not invented by anybody. So that'll be the first language that any good clinician will try to disabuse somebody of, saying like, well, if they would only, blah, 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 then I wouldn't, It doesn't matter. You guys created that cycle. You're both responsible for it. And, as a clinician, I'm going to help you see if we can map it out and try to get it moving in a positive direction. And then we have the stressors coming in from all directions. We have the current cycle, and we have the historical cycle. And sometimes people change so much, like in a longer term relationship. I'm in a long-term relationship. I can tell you some of the interactions that we've had over the years have a similar theme, but there are definitely big changes that happen across the lifespan for each of us. So, how we might behave in the old way. Let's see if I can give an example of that. That's not my couplehood. I worked with a client couple once where they had got kind of like a life-changing circumstance. And so they both worked really hard to overcome it. But they still had a negative cycle, but they also had a historic negative cycle that was quite different. So we used to have this behavior and these kind of feelings, and now we have this behavior and these kind of feelings. And it was certainly healthier than what had broken them down previously, but it definitely was a reference back to. And so I like this image for my clinician friends, like notice the depth of what you're doing, because you're still trying to understand the attachment injury across all of those and whether those attachment injuries were attended to fully. So an attachment injury would be something big like an infidelity or grief and loss, a shared grief and loss, where the attachment needs were not met in a really severe way, like a separation, a divorce, and a reconnection. Those kinds of things tend to be big attachment injuries, real abandonment kinds of things. Drug addiction can be, the behavior that comes from drug or alcohol addiction can show up in attachment injury over time as well. So all of that to say, thank you, clinician friends who are willing to do all of that work to manage your own internal everything and bring all of that relevant experience into the room as you're working with couples or other people who are trying to be in close relationship, parent-child, good friend, working partners, whatever that is. Thank you for doing that heavy emotional labor. And that's all I've got for you today on the EFT cycle. Thanks.